The vault's executive office sat empty at 3 in the afternoon, a rare pocket of silence in a building designed for chaos after dark. Sloane Hartley pressed her phone tight against her ear, lowering her voice even though nobody was around to hear. "I already told you no, Reese." Her best friend's exasperated sigh crackled through the speaker. "But why? The man is gorgeous, rich, powerful, and completely obsessed with you. For 3 years, Sloane. 3. Sloane organized the contracts on her desk with more force than necessary papers snapping against wood. Her heart rate kicked up just thinking about Cade Sullivan, which was exactly the problem. She'd spent 3 years building walls, and every conversation like this threatened to crack the foundation. "He's also my boss, and arrogant, and a criminal who runs the most exclusive nightclub in the city and treats his employees better than any legitimate businessman I've ever seen." That part was true. Sloane had watched Cade transform the vault over the past 3 years, implementing policies that protected staff from the kind of harassment that had destroyed her teenage years. Zero tolerance. Real consequences. The kind of structure his father would have mocked. "It doesn't matter." Sloane pressed her fingers to her temple, fighting the headache building behind her eyes. "You know why this can never happen. I know you're terrified. I'm realistic. You're in love with him." Reese's voice softened, losing the teasing edge. "You can't go 5 minutes without mentioning his name, and every time you do, your voice changes. Don't think I haven't noticed." Heat crept up Sloane's neck. Her free hand stilled on the desk as the truth settled heavy in her chest. She closed her eyes, letting herself admit what she'd been denying for months. "Okay, maybe I find him attractive." "Attractive?" Reese practically screamed through the phone. "That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change the fact that getting involved would be the worst decision of my life." Sloane's throat tightened around words she'd repeated so many times they'd become a shield. "He doesn't know who I really am. He doesn't know about my past. And when he finds out, you've been working there for 3 years and he still hasn't figured it out. I looked different at 18. Longer hair, baby fat, scared out of my mind." Sloane touched her face reflexively, remembering the girl she'd been. "Besides, I was just another waitress in a sea of employees. Why would he remember me? Maybe you should tell him." "Absolutely not." "Sloane." "He's gorgeous, okay?" The words burst out before Sloane could stop them, pressure valve releasing after 3 years of careful control. "Infuriatingly irresistible. Those gray eyes that see right through every defense I've built. That smile that makes my stomach flip even when I'm furious with him. He's funny when he's not being an arrogant idiot and protective in ways that scare me because I want to trust it. But I can't give him that power. That smile that what?" The voice behind her made every muscle freeze, deep, amused, absolutely devastating in its casual confidence. Sloane's blood turned to ice as she spun around, phone slipping from nerveless fingers. Cade Sullivan leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, 6 feet 2 inches of controlled danger wrapped in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Dark hair slightly messed from running his hands through it, a habit she'd memorized without meaning to. Those winter storm eyes gleamed with something between satisfaction and heat that made breathing impossible. "Reese, I'll call you back." Sloane managed to disconnect without looking every ounce of focus needed to maintain composure while her heart tried to hammer through her ribcage. Cade pushed off the doorframe, each step deliberate as he crossed the office. The space shrank with his presence, air pressure changing until Sloane felt the weight of him everywhere. "How long were you standing there?" His mouth curved into that dangerous smile she'd just been confessing about. "Long enough to hear that my smile makes your stomach flip, which I'm definitely filing away for later." Heat flooded her face, the kind of full-body flush that couldn't be hidden or explained away. Sloane gripped the edge of her desk, needing something solid to anchor her while everything else tilted sideways. That was a private conversation. "In my office." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne cedar and something darker that made her pulse spike. "About me. I'd say that negates privacy clauses. Standard workplace harassment protocols suggest otherwise." "Harassment?" Cade's eyes warmed with amusement that shouldn't be attractive but absolutely was. "I haven't done anything yet. You're the one who admitted I'm irresistible." I said infuriatingly irresistible. The first word matters. "Not to me." He moved closer, eliminating another foot of safe distance. "You also said I see through your defenses. Want to tell me what you're defending against everything, the past, the truth, the terror of wanting someone she absolutely shouldn't trust?" Sloane forced her spine straight, pulling together every scrap of professionalism she'd cultivated over 3 years. "Was there something work-related you needed, Mr. Sullivan?" The formality made him pause, something shifting behind those calculating eyes. He studied her face like he was seeing new pieces to a puzzle he'd been working on for years. "Cade," he corrected quietly. "You've been working here for 3 years. We passed Mr. Sullivan about 2 years and 11 months ago. Professional boundaries exist for a reason." "Professional boundaries." He repeated the words, slowly testing them. "Is that why you've turned me down for dinner approximately 156 times? You've been counting every single one." The admission came without shame, raw honesty that made her chest ache. "First time was 3 years ago. You'd been working here for 2 weeks. I asked you to dinner and you said no without even looking up from your computer." Sloane remembered. She remembered everything about that moment, the shock of seeing him walk into the office, the panic when she'd recognized those eyes from her nightmares, the desperate need to establish distance before he could place her face. "I don't mix work with personal life." "You don't mix anything with personal life." Cade leaned against her desk, arms crossed again in a posture that should be casual but radiated tension. 3 years, Sloane. I've watched you turn down every man who's asked you out. Watch you leave every company event early. Build walls so high I'm amazed you can see over them. Maybe I like my walls. Maybe you're hiding." The accuracy stole her breath. Sloane turned away, needing to break the intensity of his gaze before she said something catastrophic. Her hands shook as she gathered papers that didn't need gathering, busy work to avoid the conversation drilling toward truths she couldn't afford to share. "I need to finish these contracts before 5. Sloane. Just her name, but the way he said it made her pause. "Give me 1 month." She looked back despite every instinct screaming to run. Cade had straightened from the desk, hands in his pockets, stance open, in a way that should ease her panic, but somehow made it worse. Vulnerability didn't belong on a man this powerful. 1 month of what exactly? "Let me court you. Properly. Honestly." He held up a hand when she started to protest. "With rules. Your rules. Non-negotiable boundaries that I swear I'll respect." "This is insane. This is me trying to prove I'm not whatever you think I am." Cade took a step closer, and Sloane found herself trapped between him and the bookshelf, pulse racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "You admitted you're attracted to me. You said I'm irresistible. Give me 30 days to show you that's not a bad thing. And if at the end of 30 days I still say no," pain flickered across his face, quickly masked, "then I'll accept it, completely. No more asking, no more flowers showing up at your desk every Monday, no more hopeful looks when I pass your office. I'll be your boss, and nothing more." The promise of his absence should bring relief. Instead, something twisted in Sloane's stomach loss for something she'd never allowed herself to have. "What kind of rules are we talking about?" Victory lit his eyes, quickly tempered when he saw her defensive posture. Smart man. He knew he hadn't won anything yet. "You tell me. What would make you feel safe?" Safe. The word lodged in her throat like glass. Nothing about Cade Sullivan made her feel safe. He made her feel alive and terrified and desperate for things she'd sworn off 10 years ago when the world had taught her exactly what happened to girls who trusted powerful men. No pressure, emotional or physical. Sloane heard herself speaking, watching the negotiation unfold like she was outside her body. "No inappropriate touches. No using your position to manipulate me into anything." "Agreed." No hesitation. "And if I decide to see other people during this month, you don't get to make a scene." That one landed differently. Cade's jaw locked, muscle jumping as he processed the condition. His hands flexed once before he forced them, still control reasserting itself over whatever possessive instinct had flared. "You're going to date other men?" The question came out carefully neutral, but something dangerous flickered in those winter eyes. "Maybe, maybe not. The point is, you can't dictate my choices." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken challenges. Sloane lifted her chin, refusing to back down even as her heart hammered against her ribs. If she gave him this month, and that was still a massive if, she needed to maintain some control over the situation before it consumed her completely. "Okay." Cade finally spoke the word clearly, costing him. "I accept your terms, but I have one condition of my own, which is brutal honesty." He closed the remaining distance until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the cedar cologne mixing with something uniquely him. "If you feel something, anything, you tell me. No running, no hiding behind those walls. If this scares you, you say so. If I do something that crosses a line, you call me on it immediately. And if you start falling for me, Sloane, you don't lie about it." The demand stripped her bare, exposing every defense she'd carefully constructed. Honesty meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant giving him weapons to destroy her. But wasn't that what she'd been doing anyway? Lying to herself about not feeling anything while her chest ached every time he walked past her office, pretending indifference when his smile made her forget how to breathe. 1 month. Sloane extended her hand like they were sealing a business contract, not agreeing to something that would probably shatter her carefully rebuilt life. "Starting today." Cade looked at her offered hand and laughed, the sound rich and genuine. So formal. But he took her hand anyway, fingers closing around hers with warmth that sent electricity shooting up her arm. "We start today." And Sloane, "What? Thank you." He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that shouldn't feel as intimate as it did. "For giving me a chance to prove you wrong about whatever you think I am." He left before she could respond, taking all the oxygen with him. Sloane collapsed into her desk chair, hands still tingling where his lips had touched. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reese. "What happened?" "You hung up mid-sentence and I heard a male voice." Sloane stared at the message, then at the doorway where Cade had stood, then at her hand where she could still feel the ghost of his kiss. "I think I just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the best decision. Ask me in 30 days, if she survived that long." 10 years melted away too easily in the darkness behind Sloane's eyelids. She sat in her apartment that night, wine glass untouched on the coffee table, memories playing like film she couldn't stop. 18 years old, scholarship to business school during the day, waitress uniform at night to pay for books and rent. The vault had been different then, darker, more dangerous, the kind of place that attracted men who thought money bought them anything they wanted, including her. She could still feel the VIP client's hand on her thigh under the table, squeezing hard enough to bruise. Could still hear herself saying, "No, please stop." Could still see the moment his expression shifted from entitled to angry. The scene that followed had destroyed her in ways that took years to repair. She'd fought back, actually shoved him away when he'd grabbed her in the hallway when his hands had gone places they had no right to go. Staff had pulled them apart. Security had been called. And then Cade's father, Don Sullivan, had emerged from his office with cold calculation in his eyes. "The client complained that you were inappropriate, making advances, trying to leverage your position for tips." The accusation had punched the air from her lungs. She'd looked around desperately for someone to confirm the truth, that she'd been defending herself, that the man had assaulted her, that this wasn't her fault. Her eyes had landed on a younger man standing slightly behind Don Sullivan. Mid-20s, expensive suit, dark hair, gray eyes that met hers for one terrible second before sliding away. She'd silently begged him to speak up, to tell the truth, to do something. He'd turned his back. 20 minutes later, she'd been escorted out with a termination notice citing misconduct. No hearing, no investigation. Just the implicit understanding that VIP clients mattered more than teenage waitresses. Sloane opened her eyes, pressing her palms against them to stop the burning. She'd spent 7 years working other jobs, getting her degree at night, building skills that would make her invaluable. When she'd seen the executive secretary position at the vault 3 years ago, something had compelled her to apply. Closure, maybe. A chance to see if the place had changed, if the people had changed. She'd walked into the interview expecting Don Sullivan and had found Cade instead. Older now, harder with shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd paid prices she couldn't see. He'd looked at her application, looked at her face, and shown no sign of recognition. Why would he? She'd been one traumatized girl among hundreds of employees. Her hair had been longer, then lighter. Baby fat had softened features that were sharp now. She'd been invisible then, just another body serving drinks to men who wouldn't remember her name. Have you worked in hospitality before? The question had been professional. Kind, even. She'd recited her carefully prepared resume, watching for any flicker of memory. Nothing. The policies here have changed significantly in the past few years. Zero tolerance for harassment of any kind. Staff safety is my top priority. She'd almost laughed at the irony, almost asked if that included VIP clients who thought they owned whatever they touched, almost told him she knew exactly what the old policies had been because they'd destroyed her. But she'd needed the job, needed to know if this man was different from his father or if power inevitably corrupted everyone who held it. 3 years had given her the answer. Cade had rebuilt the vault from the inside out, new management, new rules, new culture. She'd watched him fire a high-paying regular for grabbing a bartender's wrist, watched him implement mandatory security escorts for female staff leaving late, watched him transform his father's legacy into something that actually protected the people who worked there. He'd become someone worth forgiving, which made her attraction to him infinitely more dangerous. Sloane's phone buzzed. Cade's name lit the screen above a message that made her stomach flip exactly like she'd admitted to Reese. Day 1 starts tomorrow. Breakfast at your desk, 8 a.m. I remember you drink black coffee with an extra shot and no sugar because apparently you enjoy suffering. She stared at the message fingers hovering over the keyboard. The smart response would be professional, distant, a reminder of boundaries. How do you know my coffee order? His reply came immediately. I've been paying attention for 3 years. You just never noticed. Something warm and terrifying bloomed in her chest. Sloane set the phone down before she could type something she'd regret, but the screen lit again. Sleep well, Sloane. Tomorrow I start proving you wrong about me. She didn't sleep well. She lay awake staring at her ceiling, alternating between excitement and panic, replaying that moment in her office when he'd been close enough to kiss, wondering what would happen if she let herself fall, terrified of the answer. Morning came too fast and too slow simultaneously. Sloane dressed with extra care, navy sheath dress heels that added 3 inches hair, pulled back in a style that was professional armor. War paint for a battle she wasn't sure she wanted to win. The coffee was already on her desk when she arrived at 7:45, steam rising from a cup that definitely hadn't come from the break room. Next to it sat a bakery box and a note in Cade's precise handwriting. Black coffee, extra shot, no sugar. Chocolate croissant because you skip breakfast when you're nervous. See you at noon. See. Sloane touched the cup, warmth seeping into her palm. He'd been watching. Really watching. The kind of attention that saw past her walls to the person hiding behind them. Noon arrived with Cade appearing in her doorway, tie loosened sleeves rolled to his elbows in a way that should be illegal. Lunch. Casual place 2 blocks from here. No pressure, just food and conversation. The steakhouse was exactly what he'd promised, worn booths, checkered tablecloths, the smell of grilled meat and honest cooking. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to impress, just real. They slid into a corner booth and Cade immediately started talking about the restaurant's history. Family-owned for 40 years, best ribeye in the city. The owner's daughter had just graduated law school. Easy conversation that asked nothing from her except presence. You come here often? Sloane accepted the laminated menu, hyper-aware of his knee a few inches from hers under the table. Once a week, usually. It's real. No one here wants anything from me except to pay my bill and maybe leave a good tip. He set down his menu, eyes finding hers across the table. Tell me something I don't know about you. You know everything relevant. It's all in my employee file. I know facts. Where you went to school, your work history, your emergency contact information. I don't know anything real. Cade leaned back, giving her space even as his attention pinned her in place. What's your family situation? Where did you grow up? What do you do when you're not making my business run smoother than it has any right to?" The questions were gentle, but they still scraped against old wounds. Sloane twisted her napkin, buying time while deciding how much truth to offer. "Parents divorced when I was 12. Mom moved to Florida, remarried, started a new family. Dad and I don't talk." The words came out flat, years of practice, keeping emotion locked down. "I grew up here, worked my way through business school, and I don't really have hobbies because I spent most of my 20s building a career." Cade's expression shifted, something that looked like understanding mixed with pain. "No contact with your father at all?" "Not in about 8 years. Sloane met his eyes, daring him to push. "Some relationships aren't worth maintaining." "I understand that." His voice dropped, losing the easy confidence. "My father and I weren't exactly close before he died, and my mother fled to Europe the day after the funeral. Haven't heard from her in 7 years. The vulnerability in the admission cracked something in Sloane's chest. She'd known his father had died. It was why she'd been willing to consider working at the vault again. But she'd assumed typical grief, normal family mourning. Not this hollow absence. "Do you miss her?" "I miss who I thought she was. The reality." Cade shrugged, but tension lived in his shoulders. "She chose distance over dealing with our family's legacy. Can't say I blame her, but I also can't forgive it. My brother needed her and she left anyway." Brother. Past tense in the way he said it, the grief evident even years later. "I didn't know you had a brother." "Had. Victor died 10 years ago. 23 years old, wrong place at the wrong time in a business deal that went sideways." Cade's jaw locked, muscle jumping. "I was 25 and supposed to protect him. Failed spectacularly at that." 10 years ago. The same timeline as Sloane's assault. She wondered what else had been happening in Cade's life that night, what pressures had kept him silent when she'd needed someone to speak up. The thought didn't excuse his failure, but it complicated her anger in ways that felt dangerous. "I'm sorry." The words were inadequate, but his grief was so raw even a decade later that she had to offer something. "Me too." Cade reached across the table, fingertips brushing her hand before retreating. Testing. Gentle. "Guess we both have complicated family situations." Their food arrived, breaking the heavy moment. They ate and talked about safer things, favorite books, terrible movies they secretly loved, the ridiculous customer who'd tried to pay his tab in cryptocurrency last week. Easy conversation that shouldn't feel this natural, but did. Walking back to the vault. Cade's hand found the small of her back when they crossed the street. Light pressure, protective without being possessive. Sloane's breath caught at the contact, warmth spreading from that single point of touch. "Thank you for lunch." She stopped outside the building's entrance, needing to establish some distance before she did something stupid like lean into his touch. "Tomorrow." Hope and caution mixed in his expression. "Tomorrow." The agreement slipped out before wisdom could intervene. His smile was devastating. "I'll count the hours." Days blurred into a pattern that felt inevitable. Coffee every morning, precise to her preferences. Lunch at different casual spots. Diners, food trucks, the sandwich shop that made everything fresh. Dinners a few times when work ran late. Thai food so spicy they both cried, laughing, burgers that dripped everywhere. Pizza eaten straight from the box on his office floor because the conference room was occupied. Cade never pushed, never demanded, just showed up consistently, proving through actions that he meant what he'd promised. And slowly, terrifyingly, Sloane felt her walls developing stress fractures. 2 weeks in, they sat in his office after midnight finishing a contract proposal. Sloane stretched, neck cracking from hours hunched over paperwork, and found Cade watching her with an expression that stole her breath. "What? You're brilliant." Simple statement delivered like fact. "I've watched you negotiate deals that would make seasoned lawyers nervous. You see angles no one else catches. And you do it while making everyone think it was their idea." Heat crept up her neck. "I'm just doing my job." "You're being modest." Cade stood, crossing to where she sat on his couch. He settled beside her close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. Do you know what you want, Sloan, beyond this job, beyond these walls you've built? What do you actually want from life? The question shouldn't hurt, but it did, because she'd spent so long just surviving that wanting felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. I want to feel safe. The truth escaped before she could cage it. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. I want to trust someone without waiting for them to prove why I shouldn't. Cade's hand found hers, fingers intertwining slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't want. Has someone hurt you? His voice had gone lethal soft, the tone that reminded her exactly what kind of man he was beneath the expensive suits. Because I need names, Sloan. I need to know who made you this afraid. Yes, someone hurt me, and you stood there and let it happen. The words lodged in her throat, too dangerous to release. Instead, she squeezed his hand, holding on while trembling with the weight of secrets. It doesn't matter anymore. It was a long time ago. It matters if it's still affecting you now. Then let's say I'm working on it. Sloan forced herself to meet his eyes, seeing genuine concern there. Being here with you, it's terrifying, but it's also the first time in years I've wanted to try trusting someone. The kiss was inevitable. Cade's free hand cupped her face with devastating gentleness, thumb tracing her cheekbone as he leaned in, their breath mixed in the space between almost and everything. Sloan closed the gap. His mouth met hers, soft and questioning, giving her every chance to retreat. She sank into him instead, hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, turned desperate years of denial combusting into need that scared her with its intensity. When they finally separated, both breathless foreheads pressed together, Cade whispered against her lips. I've been waiting 3 years for this, worth every second. Panic flooded her system without warning. This was too much, too fast, too real. Sloan pushed away, scrambling to her feet, chest heaving. I need to go. Confusion and hurt flashed across Cade's face. Did I do something wrong? No, yes. I don't know. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands. I just need to think. I can't. She ran before finishing the sentence, before she could see his expression crumble, before her own resolve could shatter completely. The drive home passed in a blur of panic and regret. Sloane's lips still burned from his kiss, her body aching for the warmth she'd fled. She collapsed on her couch and finally let herself cry for the girl she'd been, for the woman she was trying to become, for the impossible situation she'd created by letting Cade Sullivan past her defenses. Her phone lit up. 5 messages from Reese demanding details, 3 from work contacts, and 1 from Cade that made her chest crack open. I'm sorry if I pushed too hard. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Sloan stared at the words until they blurred. She typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on honesty. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm just scared. Of me. Of wanting you this much. She hit send before cowardice could stop her, watching the 3 dots appear and disappear multiple times before his response finally came. Then, let me prove I'm worth the risk. Please, Sloan, just give me the rest of the month. 15 days left. 15 days to decide if she was brave enough to forgive the past and trust the man Cade had become. 15 days before everything changed one way or another. Okay, but we go slower. Whatever you need. Sleep well. Sloan looked at her ceiling, pulse still racing, lips still tingling. Sleep seemed impossible. But for the first time in 10 years, she let herself imagine a future where fear didn't dictate every decision, where she could be wanted without being destroyed, where Cade Sullivan's gray eyes promised safety instead of betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new opportunities for everything to fall apart. But tonight, wrapped in the memory of his kiss and the warmth of his promise, Sloan let herself hope, even if hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The morning after their kiss arrived with rain hammering against Sloan's apartment windows, matching the chaos inside her chest. She'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, replaying the moment her control had shattered, and she'd fled Cade's office like a coward. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from him at 7 a.m., both accompanied by texts she couldn't bring herself to open yet. Work demanded her presence regardless of emotional catastrophe. Sloane dressed in charcoal gray armor against vulnerability and arrived at the vault before 8 to find her desk conspicuously empty. No coffee, no pastry, no note in Cade's handwriting. The absence hurt more than it should. She buried herself in contracts and vendor negotiations, anything to avoid thinking about Winter Storm eyes and the taste of his mouth on hers. Her office door stayed closed all morning, a barrier against conversations she wasn't ready to have. 11:30 brought a knock she couldn't ignore. Garrett stood in the doorway, Cade's second in command and the closest thing either of them had to a trusted friend. His weathered face showed concern that made Sloane's stomach drop. "Boss wants to see you. His office now." Professional summons delivered in a tone that left no room for refusal. Sloane followed him down the hallway, pulse hammering harder with each step. Cade's office door stood open, revealing him behind his desk, with shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. He looked up when she entered, expression carefully neutral. Garrett closed the door behind her, trapping them in heavy silence. "You ran." Cade's voice came out flat, stripped of the warmth she'd grown dangerously accustomed to. "I need to understand why." Sloane gripped her tablet like a shield, nails digging into the case. Every instinct screamed to deflect, maintain distance, rebuild the walls that one kiss had cracked wide open. "I got scared." "Of me?" The question held an edge of pain that made her chest ache. "Of this. Us. Whatever this is becoming." She forced herself to meet his gaze, seeing hurt there despite his attempt at control. "I told you I needed slower." We kissed, Sloane. One kiss after 2 weeks of lunch dates and careful conversation. If that's too fast, I don't know what slow looks like to you. Fair point. Devastatingly fair. She'd been the one to close the distance, to fist her hands in his shirt and kiss him like she was drowning. Running afterward sent mixed signals that weren't his fault to interpret. "You're right. I'm sorry." The apology tasted like surrender. "I panicked. It felt too good, and that terrified me because every time I've trusted someone—" She cut herself off, words skating too close to truths that would destroy everything. Cade stood slowly, crossing to where she'd frozen near the door. His hand lifted toward her face, hesitated, fell back to his side when he caught her flinch. "Has someone hurt you?" The question came gentler now, lethal promise beneath the surface. "Really hurt you in ways that make trust impossible?" "Yes. You. 10 years ago when you were someone else and I was invisible." "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it for me." Cade's jaw locked with frustration. "How am I supposed to prove I'm different if you won't tell me what I'm fighting against? You can't fix everything with power and money and good intentions." Sloane's voice cracked despite her best efforts. "Some damage is permanent. Some fears are earned. So I'm being punished for someone else's sins." The accusation landed like a slap. Sloane stepped back, tablet pressed against her chest, breathing suddenly difficult in air that felt too thin. "That's not fair. Neither is expecting me to read your mind." Cade dragged a hand through his hair, the gesture destroying its usual perfection. "I'm trying, Sloane. God knows I'm trying. But you have to meet me halfway, or this is just me chasing shadows while you run from ghosts." Truth burned in her throat, demanding release. She could tell him right now about the assault, the termination, the way his silence had broken something fundamental in her ability to trust. Watch his face as he realized the girl he'd failed to protect was standing in front of him, asking for another chance. But the words stuck behind years of self-preservation. Because once he knew, everything changed. Either he'd be consumed by guilt and their relationship would be built on his penance, or he'd rationalize his inaction and prove her worst fears right. "I need more time." Something died in Cade's expression, hope extinguishing behind careful blankness. He nodded once, turning back toward his desk in dismissal. "Take all the time you need. We still have 15 days left in our agreement. Use them however you want." The professional distance in his tone carved through her defenses worse than anger would have. Sloane fled before tears could betray her, making it to her office and locking the door before the first sob escaped. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reese demanding lunch details. Sloane stared at the message, then at the clock showing 12:15, then at her empty doorway where Cade normally appeared with easy smiles and restaurant suggestions. The silence felt like punishment. She worked through lunch, through the afternoon, through the moment Cade left at 6 without stopping by her office. The absence confirmed what she'd already known: she'd wounded something between them that might not heal. 7 p.m. brought another knock. Sloane looked up, expecting Garrett with more professional summons, but found Reese instead, concern etched across her face. "Intervention time. You're coming to dinner and you're going to tell me everything." The diner 2 blocks over served mediocre food and excellent privacy. Sloane collapsed into a booth and immediately started talking, words flooding out in a confession she'd held back for 3 years. The assault, the termination, Cade's failure, her decision to return, the impossible attraction, the kiss, the flight. Reese listened without interrupting, processing everything with the sharp intelligence that made her an excellent bartender and better friend. "So you're in love with the man who failed to protect you 10 years ago?" "I'm not in love." "Don't." Reese cut through the denial with surgical precision. "I've watched you for 3 years. You're completely gone for him, which makes this situation infinitely more complicated because you can't decide if you're forgiving him or setting yourself up for destruction." Accurate enough to hurt. Sloane pressed her palms against her eyes, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. "He doesn't even remember me from back then. I was invisible. Just another waitress in a sea of employees." "Have you considered telling him?" "Every day, and every day I find new reasons why that's a terrible idea." Sloane lowered her hands, meeting Reese's concerned gaze. "What if he's horrified? What if he makes this whole thing about his guilt instead of us? Or worse, what if he decides I'm too damaged to deal with? What if he surprises you?" Reese's voice gentled. "You said he's changed. That the vault is completely different now. That he protects employees instead of clients. Maybe he's been trying to atone for something he can't quite remember." The possibility lodged in Sloane's chest, hope and terror mixing poisonously. She thought about Cade's zero-tolerance policies, his fierce protection of staff, the shadows in his eyes when he talked about his brother's death. "I'm scared, Reese. Of wanting this. Of believing it's real. Of giving him power to destroy me again." "Then don't give him power. Keep yours." Reese reached across the table, squeezing Sloane's hand. "But maybe stop running long enough to see if he's worth the risk. Because from where I'm sitting, you've already decided he is. You're just too terrified to admit it." Sloane returned to her apartment that night with Reese's words echoing in her skull. She found her laptop and did something she'd avoided for 3 years: researched Cade's history after his father's death. The articles painted a picture she hadn't fully understood. Don Sullivan died in federal custody awaiting trial for racketeering and corruption. Victor Sullivan, Cade's younger brother, had been killed in a deal gone wrong 6 months earlier. Their mother had fled to Europe immediately after the funeral, leaving Cade alone to inherit an empire built on violence and exploitation. He'd been 25 years old, the same age when he'd stood silent while Sloane was blamed and fired. New articles showed what came after. Cade had spent 2 years systematically dismantling his father's criminal infrastructure while building legitimate businesses. Nightclub real estate security consulting. Clean money replacing dirty. Employee protection policies implemented across every venture. Anonymous donations to organizations supporting assault survivors. Atonement, maybe? Or genuine transformation? Sloane stared at a photo from 3 years ago, Cade cutting the ribbon at the vault's grand reopening after extensive renovations. His expression showed determination and exhaustion, in equal measure a man trying to build something better from inherited ashes. She'd walked into his interview 2 weeks later. Her phone buzzed with a message that made her breath catch. Cade's name, first contact since their painful conversation. "I owe you an apology. Pushing you to explain your fears when you're not ready was wrong. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here." Sloane's fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart hammering against her ribs. She could ignore it. Maintain distance. Let the remaining 15 days expire without further contact. Or she could be brave. "I'm sorry, too. For running. For not being able to explain. For making this harder than it needs to be." His response came immediately. It doesn't have to be hard. We can just be. No pressure, no expectations, just coffee and conversation until you're ready for more. Tomorrow, our usual time, I'll bring the coffee. You bring yourself. That's all I need. Relief and terror fought for dominance in Sloane's chest. She set the phone down and pulled up information about the vault's policies again, reading through protection protocols Cade had personally implemented. Every single one addressed vulnerabilities his father had exploited. Maybe Reese was right. Maybe this was atonement for sins he couldn't quite remember, but felt anyway. Morning arrived with Sloane's resolve solidified. She dressed deliberately burgundy sheath dress that made her feel powerful instead of defensive, wore paint transformed into celebration of survival. The coffee sat on her desk at 7:45, still steaming. Next to it, a single burgundy rose and a note that made tears burn behind her eyes. Red felt too obvious. Burgundy suits you better, complex and understated and absolutely beautiful. See you at noon. C. Lunch found them back at the steakhouse, settling into their corner booth like coming home. Cade ordered for both of them without asking, getting her preferences exactly right, making space for easy conversation that didn't demand confessions. Tell me about business school. His request came casual, genuinely interested. What made you choose that path? Control. Independence. The ability to never be powerless again. Practical choice. Good career prospects, stable income skills that transfer across industries. Sloane cut her steak with more precision than necessary. I worked my way through night classes while holding down day jobs. Took 7 years to finish what most people do in 4. Respect flickered across Cade's expression. That kind of determination is rare. Most people would have quit. Quitting wasn't an option. The admission slipped out harder than intended. I needed to prove I was more than what people assumed about me. And what did people assume? That she was disposable, forgettable, someone whose pain mattered less than a client's comfort. That I wouldn't amount to much, high school dropout who got her GED, no family support, working minimum wage jobs. Sloane met his gaze, daring him to judge. Easy to write off as someone who'd never escaped that trajectory. Fuck everyone who underestimated you. Cade's vehemence startled her. You're the smartest person I know. Harvard-educated lawyers I work with don't see angles you catch instinctively. You negotiate deals that save us millions, and you do it while making everyone think they won. Heat crept up her neck at the praise. I'm just doing my job. You're being exceptional at your job. There's a difference. Cade leaned back, studying her with intensity that made her pulse spike. Why do you diminish yourself like that? Every accomplishment gets minimized, every compliment deflected, like you don't believe you deserve recognition. Because recognition meant visibility. Visibility meant vulnerability. Being seen meant being hurt. Old habit, I guess. Break it. Simple command delivered gently. You've earned the right to own your success, Sloane. Stop apologizing for being brilliant. The walk back to the vault stretched longer than 2 blocks should allow. Cade's hand found the small of her back at Crosswalk's light pressure that steadied instead of possessed. They talked about nothing important, whether upcoming weekend plans, the ridiculous email from a vendor demanding payment in cryptocurrency. Easy, natural, the way things could be if Sloane stopped drowning in the past. Days fell into rhythm again. Coffee mornings, lunch dates, occasional dinners when work kept them late. Cade maintained careful distance physically, never pushing beyond what she offered, but his attention remained unwavering. He noticed when she skipped meals, when stress tightened her shoulders, when something in a conversation triggered withdrawal she tried to hide. A week into their renewed truce, Sloane walked into the vault's main floor after closing to find Cade behind the bar making drinks. Music played low through the sound system, something instrumental and moody that matched the empty space's atmosphere. Thought you might need a nightcap after today's chaos. He slid a glass across the polished surface. Old-fashioned light on the sugar because you don't like things too sweet. Sloane accepted the drink, warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with alcohol. They'd spent 12 hours negotiating a vendor contract that had threatened to implode spectacularly, finally reaching agreement 20 minutes before deadline. "We make a good team." She sipped carefully, tasting the perfect balance he'd achieved. "You handle the relationship management, I handle the fine print. Works. We make a good team in general." Cade mixed his own drink with practiced efficiency. "I've been thinking about expanding your role. Executive partner instead of secretary. Equal say in major decisions, profit-sharing, real authority." The offer stole her breath. "That's a significant promotion." "You've earned it 3 times over. I'm just formalizing what's already true. This business runs better because of you." He met her eyes across the bar. "Say yes, Sloan. Let me give you what you've earned instead of what your job description technically requires." Pride and suspicion warred in her chest. "Is this because of us? The personal situation?" "This is because you're exceptional at what you do, and I'm tired of watching you minimize your value." Cade's expression hardened with determination. "If we weren't involved, if you'd maintained that professional distance, I'd still be making this offer. You've transformed how we operate. That deserves recognition beyond a better parking spot." Sloan circled the bar, needing proximity to read the truth in his face. He tracked her movement without shifting position, giving her control over the space between them. "I need to think about it." "Take your time. The offer stands regardless of anything else between us." His voice dropped, losing the professional edge. "I want you to have power here, Sloan. Real power. The kind that means no one can ever make you feel disposable again." The statement landed too accurately, striking nerves he shouldn't know existed. Sloane's breath caught as tears burned unexpectedly. Cade's hand lifted toward her face, stopped halfway when she didn't pull back, completed the gesture with devastating gentleness. His thumb caught the single tear that escaped her control. "Who hurt you?" Whispered question loaded with protective fury that terrified and comforted simultaneously. "Give me a name. Let me fix it." "You can't fix the past. You can't undo standing silent when I needed someone to speak." "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple for me." Cade's other hand found her waist, steady pressure without trapping. "Tell me what you need. Tell me how to prove I'm safe. Tell me anything except that I should stop trying." Sloan pressed her forehead against his chest, breathing in cedar cologne and something uniquely him. His heart hammered beneath expensive fabric rhythm matching her own chaos. "I need time to trust this, to believe it's real and not just—" She struggled for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "Not just you wanting what you can't have, the challenge of someone who said no." Cade's arms came around her, carefully holding her like something precious that might shatter. His lips pressed against her hair, warmth bleeding through despite her best defenses. "You were never a challenge, Sloan. You were always the point." They stood that way for minutes or hours, time losing meaning in the empty club with music playing soft around them. Eventually, Sloan pulled back enough to meet his gaze, seeing vulnerability there that matched her own. "I should go home. I know." But his arms didn't loosen immediately, holding on for 5 more heartbeats before releasing her. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow." The drive home passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. Sloane's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that made ice flood her veins. "Interesting seeing you back at the vault. Didn't expect you'd return after your termination. Wonder if your boss knows about your history there." She nearly drove off the road, hands shaking as she pulled over to read the message again. No name, no context, just veiled threat wrapped in false curiosity. Julian Cross. Had to be. One of her father's old associates who'd done business with Don Sullivan, someone who might remember the scandal even if Cade didn't. Sloane's fingers hovered over the keyboard, deleting a dozen responses before settling on cold professionalism. Wrong number. "I don't think so, Sloan Hartley." Or should I say, former employee number 2847. "Your file makes fascinating reading. Terror and fury mixed poisonously. Someone had accessed old records, dug into her past, weaponized her trauma for leverage she couldn't yet identify. The implications crashed over her in waves, exposure, humiliation, watching Cade's expression change when he learned the truth from someone else's mouth. Her phone rang immediately. Cade's name flashing on screen, timing so perfect it couldn't be coincidence. "Are you home yet?" Concern threaded through his voice. Garrett just flagged something in our security system. Someone accessed archived employee files remotely. We're tracking the breach, but I wanted to warn you. They already contacted me. Sloane's voice came out hollow. Whoever it is, they have my old termination records, from 10 years ago. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Cade spoke again, every word careful. You worked here before, when my father was alive. The question she'd dreaded for 3 years, arriving through the worst possible circumstances. Sloane closed her eyes, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because it's complicated and painful and I wasn't ready to explain. More silence. She could hear him processing, connecting dots that would lead to conclusions she'd spent years avoiding. Sloane, what happened back then? Why were you terminated? The truth lodged in her throat like broken glass. She could lie, deflect, maintain the fiction for a few more days while she figured out how to handle Julian's threat, or she could rip the bandage off and watch everything bleed. Not over the phone. Please, Cade. I'll tell you everything. Just not like this. Tomorrow morning, my office 7 a.m. Command not request. No more delays, Sloane. If someone's weaponizing your past against you, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Okay. Whispered agreement, surrender to inevitability. And Sloane, whatever happened, whatever you think I'll do when I find out you're wrong, nothing changes how I feel about you. If only that were true. She disconnected and drove home on autopilot, mind racing through scenarios. By morning, Cade would know everything. Would see her differently, or worse, see her finally. The invisible girl he'd failed to protect would have a face, a name, a history he couldn't ignore. Their relationship would transform from possibility to penance. His attraction would be poisoned by guilt. Every touch would carry the weight of atonement instead of genuine desire. Unless she ran. Quit her job, left the city, disappeared before dawn, and spared them both the devastation. Sloane sat in her car outside her apartment building, keys cutting into her palm, considering escape for the first time in 3 years. She could be packed and gone in 2 hours. New city, new job, new identity, built on fresh lies. But running would mean Julian won. Would mean the past controlled her forever. Would mean abandoning the life she'd built and the man she'd grown to love despite every reason not to. Her phone buzzed again. Cade's message appeared above Julian's threat, 2 paths diverging with her future balanced between them. Whatever you're thinking right now, running, hiding, protecting me from something you think I can't handle, stop. We face this together. That's what tomorrow means. Trust me enough for 1 more day. Sloane stared at the words until they blurred decision, crystallizing with painful clarity. She'd spent 10 years letting fear dictate her choices. Maybe it was time to choose courage instead. 7 a.m. I'll be there. Thank you. Sleep if you can. I'll see you in the morning. Sleep proved impossible. Sloane lay awake rehearsing confessions, watching scenarios play out behind her closed eyelids. Dawn arrived too fast, bringing the moment she'd dreaded and postponed for 3 years. She dressed in navy armor, pulling her hair back with shaking hands, applying makeup that wouldn't survive the conversation ahead. The drive to the vault stretched eternal and too brief simultaneously. Cade's office door stood open when she arrived at 6:55. He sat behind his desk with shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had, 2 coffee cups already waiting. Close the door. Gentle instruction, brooking no argument. Sloane obeyed, sealing them in with truth that would change everything. She accepted the coffee he offered, needing something to hold while her world tilted sideways. Cade studied her across the desk, expression unreadable. Tell me. So she did. 10 years dissolved as words poured out. 18-years-old scholarship student, working nights, the VIP client whose hands went places she'd said no to, fighting back the accusations, Don Sullivan's cold dismissal, being escorted out while staff watched. The young man in the expensive suit who'd met her desperate gaze and turned away. You! Sloane's voice broke on the word. You were there, Cade. You saw what happened and you did nothing. You let your father destroy me to protect a client who'd assaulted me. The color drained from Cade's face as memory crashed over him. She watched him remember the confusion, the girl begging silently for help, the moment he'd chosen silence over courage. His hands started shaking. Coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup before he set it down with unsteady fingers. "Oh, God, that was you." Employee number 2847, terminated for misconduct, blamed for being assaulted. Each word landed like a blow, years of pain compressed into sentences. "I came back 3 years ago because I needed to know if you'd changed, if the vault could be different, if you could be different." Cade stood abruptly, chair rolling backward into the wall. He pressed both palms against his desk, breathing too fast, color still absent from his face. "I'm going to be sick." He made it to his private bathroom before she heard retching the violent sound of his body rejecting what his mind couldn't process. Sloane stood, frozen coffee cup trembling in her grip, watching the strongest man she knew break completely. When he emerged 5 minutes later, his face was wet from water or tears, she couldn't tell. He leaned against the doorframe like standing required more strength than he possessed. "I failed you," whispered confession gutted with self-loathing. "I was 25 and terrified of my father, and I let him. Jesus Christ, Sloane, you were 18, you were a kid, and you were powerless." The words surprised her absolution she hadn't planned to offer. "Your father controlled everything. Your brother had just died. You were surviving however you could." "That's not an excuse." "No, but it's context." Sloane set down her coffee before she dropped it. "I spent 10 years hating you for that moment, hating the man I thought you were, but you're not him anymore. The policies you implemented, the culture you've built, it's everything your father refused to do." Cade pushed off the doorframe, crossing to her on unsteady legs. His hands lifted toward her face, stopped mid-air, fell back to his sides when he saw her stiffen. "How can you stand to be near me? How can you let me touch you knowing—" "Because I've watched you for 3 years." Her voice steadied with conviction born from observation. "I've seen you fire high-paying clients for harassing staff. I've watched you implement protections your father would have mocked. You're not the scared 25-year-old who chose silence. You're the man who learned from that failure and spent a decade making sure it never happens again." Tears tracked down Cade's face without shame. "I should have protected you, should have stood up to him, should have done anything except turn my back." "Yes, you should have. Brutal honesty, necessary truth. But you were a different person then, and I'm choosing to love who you've become instead of hating who you were." The declaration hung between them, impossible to take back. Cade's expression shifted through shock, hope, devastation, and something that looked dangerously like desperate love. "You love me?" Broken question, hardly daring to believe. "I've been falling for 3 years despite every reason not to." Sloane stepped closer, closing distance she'd maintained religiously. "I'm terrified you'll make this about guilt instead of us, that you'll touch me out of penance instead of want, that your feelings will be poisoned by what you think you owe me." Cade's hands found her face, finally trembling, but sure holding her like she was the answer to prayers he hadn't known to speak. "I loved you before I knew any of this. Fell for you the first week you worked here, watching you reorganize my chaos with sharp competence and sharper wit." His forehead pressed against hers, breathing ragged. "This doesn't create my feelings, Sloane. It just makes them more complicated, because now I know exactly how badly I failed you and how much you're risking by giving me another chance. So don't waste it." She gripped his wrists, anchoring them both. "Don't let guilt consume what we're building. I need you to want me, Cade. Not fix me, not save me, just want me exactly as I am, damage and strength and everything between." The kiss was inevitable and necessary, years of pain and healing compressed into the moment their mouths met. Cade kissed her like she was oxygen after drowning, hands cradling her face with devastating gentleness. Body trembling with the effort of holding back when every instinct probably screamed to pull her closer. Sloane sank into him, letting go of defenses she'd maintained since 18, choosing trust over terror. Her hands fisted in his shirt, holding on, while the world reformed around this new reality. When they finally separated, both gasping, tears mixing on their faces, Cade kept her close forehead pressed to hers. I'm going to find out who accessed those files. And when I do, we'll handle it together." Sloane cut through the protective fury building in his voice. "No more secrets. No more doing things alone. We face Julian Cross or whoever else together." His eyes widened at the name. Julian Cross, Victor's business partner. The man who, understanding crashed over his features as more pieces connected, horror and rage mixed in equal measure. He was the client who assaulted you. Not a question. Confirmation of suspicion that made Sloane's stomach drop. She nodded, watching Cade's expression shift into something lethal that reminded her exactly what kind of man she'd chosen to love. "I'm going to destroy him." Quiet promise, absolute certainty. For what he did to you, for threatening you now, for existing in the same world as you. He's done. "Cade." "No." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, winter storm gone ice cold with determination. "You're my line, Sloane. The thing I won't compromise on. He crossed it 10 years ago and he's crossing it now. There are consequences for that." The protection should terrify her. Instead, warmth spread through her chest, some broken piece clicking into place, being defended instead of blamed, believed instead of dismissed, chosen instead of sacrificed. "What do we do?" Cade's smile was absolutely predatory. "We make him regret ever knowing your name." Cade made 3 phone calls while Sloane watched from his office couch, coffee going cold in her shaking hands. First to Garrett, demanding complete security audit and personnel files on Julian Cross. Second to his lawyer, cryptic instructions about leverage and legal exposure. Third to someone whose name he didn't speak. Conversation conducted in terse sentences that suggested violence barely leashed. "We're calling a meeting." He disconnected and turned to face her, expression hardened into the crime boss she sometimes forgot he was. "Every major player in the city. Partners, rivals, people who owe me favors. Julian wants to play games with your past. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is." Fear and gratitude warred in Sloane's chest. "You can't tell everyone what happened to me. That's my story to share or not share. I won't mention specifics." Cade crossed to kneel in front of her, hands covering hers around the cold cup. "But I can make it clear that Julian crossed a line 10 years ago that I'm only now learning about. That he's threatening someone under my protection. That there are consequences for both. And if he goes public first, spins it to make me look—" "He won't." Absolute certainty in Cade's voice. "Because the second he opens his mouth about you, I release everything I have on his business dealings. Tax fraud. Money laundering, connections to people. The FBI would love to interview. He's been operating in shadows for years. One phone call brings him into very bright light." Sloane studied his face, seeing protective fury and calculated strategy mixing with something softer. Love, maybe. The kind that would burn the world down to keep her safe. "When?" "Tomorrow night. Gives me 24 hours to gather ammunition and make sure our position is unassailable." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands, gentle counterpoint to the violence simmering beneath his control. "You don't have to be there. Can wait it out here or at home while I handle—" "I'll be there." Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I'm done hiding. Done letting men make decisions about my life without my input. If we're doing this, we do it together." Pride flickered across Cade's expression. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing kisses to her knuckles that felt like promises. "Together, then. But if at any point it becomes too much, I'll tell you. Brutal honesty, remember? That was your condition." "Best condition I ever made." He released her hands, reluctantly standing with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in his own power. "I need to make more calls. Garrett will stay with you today. Personal security until we neutralize this threat." "I don't need a babysitter. You need protection from a man who's already proven he's willing to hurt you." Steel beneath the gentle tone, non-negotiable. "Humor me, Sloane. Let me do this one thing without fighting." She wanted to argue. Wanted to prove she could handle herself, that she'd survived worse, that she didn't need saving. But the exhaustion in Cade's eyes stopped her. He'd learned she was the girl he'd failed, processed that devastation in minutes, and immediately pivoted to protecting her now. Letting him have this felt like the least she could offer. Okay, but Garrett stays outside my office. I have work to do. Deal. The rest of the day passed in surreal normalcy punctuated by dread. Sloane buried herself in contracts while Garrett stood sentinel outside her door, silent presence that should be comforting but mostly reminded her how dramatically her life had shifted in 12 hours. Reese appeared at lunch bearing Thai food and concern etched into every line of her face. Cade called, said you might need a friendly face today. She set the containers on Sloane's desk, studying her with the intensity of someone searching for cracks. Want to talk about it? I told him everything, about 10 years ago, about why I really came back. Sloane opened the containers without appetite, needing something to do with her hands. He remembered, realized he was there that he'd failed to help. Then he threw up and cried and promised to destroy Julian Cross. Very romantic. Reese's dry observation cracked through the tension. How are you feeling? Terrified, relieved like I jumped off a cliff and I'm still waiting to see if there's water below or just rocks. Sloane pushed food around without eating. He says he loved me before he knew, that this doesn't change his feelings, but how can it not? Now every time he looks at me he'll see the girl he didn't save, or he'll see the woman who survived despite him, who built herself into someone extraordinary, who chose to forgive him when she had every right to destroy him. Reese reached across the desk, squeezing Sloane's wrist. Give him credit for being able to separate past failure from present love. You did. Fair point. Devastatingly fair. Sloane had spent 3 years watching Cade prove he'd grown beyond that scared 25-year-old. She'd fallen in love with the man he'd become, not the boy he'd been. Maybe he deserved the same grace. There's a meeting tomorrow night. Cade's calling in everyone to make some kind of statement about Julian. Anxiety twisted in Sloane's stomach. I'm going to be there, standing beside him while he, I don't even know what exactly, declares war, makes threats, publicly claims me as his, all of the above probably. Reese's expression softened. Are you ready for that? For everyone to know you're together? Ready or not, it's happening. Julian forced the issue. Sloane finally managed a bite of food, tasting nothing. At least this way I control the narrative. I'm there by choice, standing with Cade instead of being a secret he's protecting. They ate in companionable silence. Reese's presence exactly what Sloane needed. No demands, no judgment, just steady friendship that had survived years of walls and secrets. Evening brought Cade back to her office, exhaustion carved into his features, but purpose burning behind winter storm eyes. It's set. Tomorrow at 8. The vault's main floor. He leaned against her desk, close enough to touch, but maintaining space like he wasn't sure of his welcome. 37 confirmed attendees. Every significant player in the city's power structure. That's a lot of witnesses. That's the point. Julian can't spin a narrative when 36 people hear the truth directly from me. Cade's jaw locked with determination. I'm making this public because secrets are what gave him power over you. Exposure strips that away. Sloane stood crossing to where exhaustion and protective fury mixed in the man she'd chosen to love despite impossible odds. Her hand found his face, thumb tracing the shadows beneath his eyes. Have you slept at all? Not really. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly. Keep seeing your face 10 years ago. The way you looked at me begging for help I didn't give. I can't make it stop. Cade. She waited until he opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. You can't fix the past by destroying yourself in the present. What happened then was tragedy. What happens now is choice. Choose to be here with me instead of drowning in guilt. How are you comforting me? Confusion and wonder mixed in his voice. You're the one who was hurt. I'm the one who failed. This should be reversed. We're both hurt, both healing, both choosing each other despite everything. Sloane pulled him closer until his forehead rested against hers. That's what tomorrow is about, right? Choosing each other publicly, making it clear that whatever Julian thinks he has over us, it's not enough to break this. Cade's arms came around her, careful pressure, like he was still afraid she might shatter. His breath ghosted warm against her temple as words escaped in a whisper. I love you, not because of what I owe you, not out of guilt or penance. I love you because you're the strongest person I've ever met, because you make me want to be better than I am, because 3 years of watching you move through the world with quiet competence and hidden pain made me realize I'd never wanted anyone the way I want you." The confession broke something open in Sloane's chest, years of defense mechanisms crumbling under the weight of his honesty. She tilted her face up, capturing his mouth in a kiss that tasted like salt and promise, choosing vulnerability over safety. When they separated, both breathing hard, Cade kept her close. "Stay with me tonight. Not we don't have to do anything. I just need you near. Need to know you're safe." "Okay." His penthouse apartment perched on the 20th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city spread out like scattered diamonds. Sloane stood at the glass while Cade ordered dinner, watching traffic flow in patterns below. "You're the first person I've brought here." His voice carried from the kitchen casual revelation of something significant. "Besides Garrett, when he helped me move in, this is my real space, where I come to escape being Cade Sullivan, crime boss and nightclub owner, where I'm just whoever I am underneath all that." Sloane turned to find him watching her with vulnerability that stole her breath. "And who are you underneath?" "Still figuring that out." He crossed to stand beside her shoulder, brushing hers. "My father built an empire on violence and exploitation. My brother died trying to escape it. My mother fled rather than face what we'd become. I inherited all that darkness, and I've spent 10 years trying to build something better from the ashes." "You have." Certainty in her voice earned through observation. "The vault is nothing like what your father created. You protect instead of exploit. You've transformed everything he built." "Not everything." Pain flickered across Cade's expression. "There are parts of the business I haven't been able to clean up yet. Connections that can't be severed without bringing the whole structure down. I'm not a good man, Sloane. I've done things that would horrify you." "Then tell me." She faced him fully, refusing to let him hide. Brutal honesty. "Remember, if we're doing this, I need to know what I'm choosing." Cade studied her face for a long moment before speaking, words coming slow and careful. "I've hurt people. Physically. When they threatened what I was building or people under my protection. I've made deals with corrupt officials to keep my businesses operating. I've leveraged information I shouldn't have to force outcomes I wanted. The clean veneer I've built is real, but it's also incomplete. There are shadows in my world that I can't eliminate without losing everything." "Do you exploit people? Traffic them, hurt innocents?" "No, never. That's my line." "Do you protect your employees? Treat them fairly? Provide real security and recourse?" "Yes, always." "Then you're not your father." Sloane's hand found his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath expensive fabric. "You're a complicated man trying to do better in a world that doesn't make that easy. I can live with complicated. I can't live with men who hurt people and call it business." Relief and something deeper flooded Cade's expression. He pulled her against him, arms wrapping tight, face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." They ate dinner on the floor in front of the windows, Chinese takeout consumed with chopsticks while the city glittered below. Easy conversation about nothing important, comfortable silence between topics, the kind of domestic intimacy Sloane had never let herself imagine. Night deepened. Cade showed her to the guest room with clean sheets and her choice of his shirts to sleep in. He kissed her goodnight at the door, gentle pressure that asked for nothing beyond this moment. "Sleep well. Tomorrow's going to be intense." Sloane changed into his shirt, soft cotton that smelled like cedar and safety, and lay in the dark thinking about the meeting ahead. Julian would be there. The man who'd assaulted her, blamed her, weaponized her trauma across a decade. She'd have to see his face while Cade made whatever statement he'd planned. Fear churned through her stomach, mixing with determination. She'd spent 10 years letting that night control her choices. Tomorrow she chose differently. Sleep came eventually, fitful and dream-haunted. She woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Cade stood at the counter fully dressed, 2 mugs already prepared. He looked up when she entered, taking in his shirt hanging to her thighs, and something heated flickered in his eyes before he controlled it. "Sleep okay?" "Adequately." She accepted the coffee he offered, perfect temperature and strength. "You, barely, spent most of the night finalizing what I'm going to say." He gestured toward a folder on the counter. "Want to see?" Sloan flipped through pages detailing Julian's business dealings, shell corporations, questionable transactions, connections to people the authorities would find interesting. Evidence gathered with terrifying efficiency in less than 24 hours. This would destroy him. That's the idea. No remorse in Cade's voice. He threatened you. Used your trauma as leverage. That has consequences. What exactly are you planning to say tonight? Cade set down his coffee, meeting her gaze with absolute certainty. That 10 years ago, Julian Cross assaulted an employee at the vault. That my father protected him instead of her. That I failed to intervene because I was young and powerless and controlled by a man I was taught to obey without question. His hands flexed once before steadying. That I've spent the past decade trying to atone for that failure by building something better. That Julian's current attempt to weaponize that woman's past against us proves he hasn't changed at all, and that anyone who continues doing business with him answers to me. The declaration was warfare disguised as confession. Sloan processed the implications, Cade publicly admitting his father's crimes, his own complicity staking his reputation on protecting her. You're risking everything. You are everything. Simple statement delivered like fact. If I lose business partners over this, they weren't worth keeping. If my reputation takes damage, I'll rebuild. But I'm not letting Julian Cross hurt you again. Not ever. Sloan set down the folder with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just protection, but public claiming. Not just defense, but transformation of her shame into Julian's. I love you. The words escaped without planning. Not because you're doing this, because you'd do this even if it cost you everything. Cade crossed to her in 3 strides, hands cradling her face, kissing her like she was oxygen and salvation combined. When they separated, his voice came rough with emotion. We should get ready. Meeting's in 9 hours and I have last-minute preparations. The vault transformed for evening gatherings, main floor, arranged with tables and subtle lighting that turned harsh space into something almost elegant. Sloan arrived an hour early wearing the burgundy dress from Cade's note weeks ago, armor disguised as elegance. Garrett met her at the entrance, respect clear in his weathered features. Boss is upstairs. Said to send you up when you arrived. Cade's private office had been converted to War Room. Garrett and 2 others Sloan didn't recognize, studying documents spread across every surface. Cade stood at the window, shoulders tight with tension that released slightly when she entered. You wore burgundy. Soft observation loaded with meaning. Seemed appropriate, complex and understated and ready for battle. She quoted his note back to him, watching surprise and pleasure flicker across his expression. Perfect. He crossed to her hands, finding her waist. Last chance to change your mind. You can wait here or go home or... I'm staying. Sloan cut through his protective instinct with firm certainty. We face this together. That's what we agreed. Guests began arriving at 7:30. Sloan watched from the balcony overlooking the main floor as the city's power structure filtered in business owners, political figures, people whose influence shaped decisions that affected thousands. Every single one owed Cade something or wanted something from him. Julian Cross arrived at 7:55, arrogance radiating from expensive suit and practiced smile. He was older than Sloan remembered, early 50s now, gray threading through dark hair, but those predatory eyes remained unchanged. Her stomach churned violently as memories crashed over her. Cade's hand found hers, steady pressure. I'm right here. Say the word and we leave. Your comfort matters more than any statement I could make. No. Sloan forced steel into her voice. He doesn't get to control me anymore. Let's do this. They descended together, Cade's hand firm on the small of her back. Conversations quieted as they appeared, everyone sensing the tension crackling through the space. Cade guided her to a small stage area position so everyone could see them clearly. His presence beside her radiated controlled fury barely leashed. "Thank you all for coming." His voice carried easily authority that demanded attention. "I called this meeting because someone in this room needs to understand consequences, and everyone else needs to understand exactly who I protect and why." Julian's expression shifted from confusion to concern as realization dawned. He started to stand, but Garrett materialized beside him, silent suggestion to remain seated. 10 years ago, the vault operated under my father's rules. Rules that prioritized profit over people, that protected clients who paid well regardless of what they did. Cade's hand tightened on Sloane's waist, anchoring them both. An employee 18 years old, working her way through college, was assaulted by a VIP client. When she fought back, my father blamed her, terminated her employment, destroyed her reputation to protect his business relationship. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. Julian's face had gone pale, calculating escape routes that didn't exist with Garrett blocking his exit. "I was 25 years old. I witnessed what happened, and I did nothing." Raw confession, pain evident despite Cade's controlled delivery. "I was young, powerless under my father's control, and I failed to protect someone who deserved protection. That failure has haunted me for a decade." Sloane's breath caught as Cade pulled her slightly forward, presenting her to the room with obvious pride and protectiveness. "Sloane Hartley is that woman. She's also the executive partner who's transformed my businesses over the past 3 years. The woman I love. The woman who had every reason to hate me and chose forgiveness instead." His voice hardened winter storm turning to ice. "And yesterday Julian Cross threatened to weaponize her past against us, to use her trauma as leverage for reasons I don't care to understand." Julian shot to his feet, face flushed. "This is absurd. I don't know what she's told you, but—" "Sit down." Cade's voice dropped to lethal quiet. "I have security footage from 10 years ago. I have employment records. I have testimony from staff who witnessed what really happened. And I have documentation of every illegal deal you've made in the past decade. So sit down and listen to what comes next." Garrett's hand on Julian's shoulder enforced the suggestion. He collapsed back into his chair, trapped. "Anyone who continues doing business with Julian Cross will find their relationship with me significantly complicated." Cade addressed the room at large. "I'm not demanding you cut ties immediately, but understand that protecting a man who assaults women and threatens them years later speaks to your character. And I remember character when making my own business decisions." The threat was elegant and brutal. Sloane watched faces around the room as people processed implications, calculating costs and benefits of continued association with Julian. As for Julian himself, Cade's attention focused like a laser on the man who'd destroyed Sloane's 18th year. "You have 48 hours to leave this city. Sell your businesses, transfer your assets, disappear completely. If you're still here in 49 hours, I release everything I have on your activities to federal authorities. They'll be very interested in your creative accounting and your connections to people they've been investigating." "You can't," Julian started. "I absolutely can, and I will." Enthusiastically. Cade's smile was absolutely predatory. "You hurt someone I love. You threatened her again when she'd rebuilt her life. Those actions have consequences you should have anticipated before making your move." Silence fell across the room, heavy with shock and calculation. Sloane stood beside Cade, feeling exposed and protected simultaneously, her past laid bare but transformed from shame into Julian's burden. "This meeting is over." Cade's hand found Sloane's, intertwining their fingers publicly. "Thank you for your time. I trust you'll make appropriate decisions regarding your future associations." People filed out slowly, many approaching Cade with quiet words of support or respect. A few women caught Sloane's eye with understanding and solidarity, survivors recognizing each other across the space. Julian tried to approach, face twisted with fury and humiliation. Garrett intercepted him before he got within 10 feet. 48 hours. Cade's voice carried the promise of violence. "Starting now." They watched him leave, defeated and cornered, power stripped away by public exposure. When the last guest departed, Sloane finally allowed herself to breathe fully. "You just declared war for me. I declared that you matter more than business, more than reputation, more than anything. Cade pulled her against him, tension draining now that performance had ended. "How are you feeling?" Shaky, relieved, terrified, grateful. Sloane pressed her face against his chest, letting his strength support her. "Like I just survived something I didn't think I could." "You were magnificent. Standing there while I told them everything, not hiding, not running." Pride filled his voice. "I meant what I said. You're the strongest person I know." They stood that way while staff cleaned around them, rebuilding the club's normal configuration. Eventually, Cade guided her upstairs to his office, closing them in blessed privacy. "What happens now?" Sloane collapsed onto his couch, exhaustion crashing over her. "We wait. Julian either leaves or I destroy him legally. Your choice which outcome you prefer." Cade settled beside her, arm coming around her shoulders. "In the meantime, we move forward. Together. Building whatever this becomes. I want the partnership. Executive partner profit sharing, real authority." The decision crystallized, born from watching Cade hand her power publicly. "I've earned it." "You absolutely have." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll make it official tomorrow. Tonight, just rest." Hours later, back at Cade's penthouse, with city lights painting patterns across the floor, Sloane found herself thinking about futures instead of pasts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Julian's response, business consequences, the reality of public claiming. But tonight, wrapped in Cade's arms on the couch while he absently traced patterns on her shoulder, she let herself believe in possibility. "Thank you," whispered into the comfortable dark between them. "For what?" "For choosing me. For protecting me. For loving me enough to risk everything." Cade shifted, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "You don't need to thank me for loving you, Sloane. You just need to let me keep doing it, every day, for as long as you'll have me." The kiss that followed tasted like promise and new beginnings. Years of pain transformed into foundation for something stronger. When they finally separated, Sloane knew with absolute certainty what came next. "Ask me again. What you asked 2 weeks ago before I ran." Understanding lit Cade's eyes. He stood, pulling her to her feet, creating space for the moment to breathe. "Give me forever. Give me mornings and evenings and everything between. Give me the honor of loving you the way you deserve." His hands found her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "Marry me, Sloane. Not because of guilt or penance, because you're my choice. Every day, always, you're who I choose." Tears tracked down her face, joy instead of pain for the first time in memory. "Yes." The word hung between them, simple and certain, transforming everything. Cade kissed her with reverent intensity, sealing promises that rewrote both their futures. Later, lying in his bed with his ring on her finger, simple platinum band he'd apparently been carrying for weeks, Sloane watched dawn paint the sky in shades of burgundy and gold. "What are you thinking?" Cade's voice rumbled sleepy and content against her hair. "That 10 years ago I thought that night destroyed me. But maybe it was just preparation for this, for choosing love despite fear, for building something real from broken pieces. Sounds like something worth writing down, for our kids someday." The casual reference to a future that included children made Sloane's breath catch. She turned in his arms, seeing vulnerability mixed with hope. "You want kids? With you? Eventually, yeah, if you do. If not, that's okay too. I just want—" He struggled for words. "I want everything with you, whatever shape that takes." 18 months later, Sloane stood in the main floor of the vault, transformed for their wedding reception. Burgundy dress swirling as Cade spun her across the dance floor. Garrett watched from the bar with Reese, both wearing satisfied expressions. Business partners and friends filled tables celebrating the union that had started with confession and ended with choice. The foundation Sloane had built bore her name now, Hartley Initiative for Survivor Support, funded through the vault's profits and her executive partnership. She testified before City Council about workplace harassment policies, using her story to create change instead of hiding from shame. Julian Cross had fled within 48 hours, businesses liquidated, assets scattered. Federal investigation into his activities continued, but he'd disappeared into obscurity that suited Sloan fine. The vault thrived under their combined leadership, reputation transformed into beacon of ethical business in industry known for exploitation. Sloan's policies had been adopted by competitors, her influence spreading beyond single establishment. Cade pulled her closer as the song ended, lips brushing her ear. Happy, impossibly, ridiculously happy. She pressed against him, feeling completely safe for the first time in memory. You, lucky beyond reason. He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then found her mouth for deeper claiming. Marrying you is the smartest thing I've ever done. Second smartest. First was implementing those protection policies. He laughed, rich and genuine. Fair assessment, though I'd argue loving you tops the list. Evening deepened around them, celebration continuing as they slipped away to Cade's office for stolen moments of privacy. The window overlooked the city where their story had unfolded across years and trauma and ultimately choice. I have something to tell you. Sloane's heart hammered as she pulled the test from her purse, positive results still shocking even after 3 confirmations. Cade's eyes widened as understanding crashed over him. His hands trembled as he took the test, staring at it like he'd been handed the world. We're pregnant. 8 weeks. She watched emotions flicker across his face. I know we said eventually, but apparently... He kissed her before she could finish, desperate and joyful and overwhelming. When they separated, tears tracked down his face without shame. You're giving me a family. A real one built on love instead of violence. I can't... His voice broke. I don't have words for what this means. Then show me. She pulled him closer, feeling his hands spread protective across her still flat stomach. Every day. The way you've been showing me since I let you in. Just keep choosing us. Always. His forehead pressed to hers, breathing her in. You and whoever this is. My family. My choice. My everything. They returned to the reception. Eventually, Cade's hand never leaving her waist, joy radiating from both of them in ways that drew knowing smiles from perceptive guests. Later that night, alone in their penthouse with city lights painting burgundy patterns across their bed, Sloan traced the scar on Cade's shoulder from an old business deal gone wrong. Tell me something. Her voice came soft in the darkness. If you could go back 10 years knowing everything that would happen, the pain, the secrets, the journey here, would you do anything different? Cade was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. When he spoke, certainty filled every word. I'd save you that night, give 18-year-old you the protection you deserved. But everything after, every moment of these past 3 years, I wouldn't change a second. Because it led here. To you, choosing me despite everything. To us building something real from broken pieces. To this family we're creating. Good answer. She kissed him, tasting salt and promise. Because I wouldn't change it either. The pain made me strong enough to forgive. The secrets made me careful enough to see the real you. The journey made this us possible. Lucky us. His hand found her stomach again, protective and gentle. Building forever from ashes. Sloan drifted toward sleep, thinking about the girl she'd been terrified, broken, certain trust would only lead to destruction. And the woman she'd become strong, loved, creating new life from old wounds. Some stories started with trauma. Hers ended with choice. The choice to forgive, to love, to build something beautiful from pain. And that made all the difference.